Hi everyone, this is the next lecture in the series for legal philosophy, and this one deals with assignment 2. And I'm doing this because quite a few students have asked me questions about assignment 2 and how they should approach it. And it turns out that many people are not sure as to exactly what the questions are about. So while I'm not going to give you the answers today, I will tell you what you need to do in order to complete this assignment successfully. So, in order to complete the assignment, you need the following. You need to have gone through all the study material. Now, I know how students think, and a lot of you think that you just need to pick the right part of the study guide and that will give you all the answers and then you can get on with your life. But you need to have gone through all of them, and I will show you how in a minute. Then you need to understand how an article is usually constructed. You will need to read through that article by Cockrell very, very thoroughly. You need to understand exactly what he's dealing with and exactly what he's saying. And to do that, you need to understand what law journal articles usually consist of. And this is actually important also for your research module, because what I'm going to say about how articles are constructed also is true for postgraduate work, for dissertations and theses and your LLB dissertation. And then in the third place, you need to be able to analyze the question correctly. You need to make sure that you are actually answering what we are asking, something that's more difficult than you might think. Okay, so as I said, you need to read through the material at least once and then make a summary. Usually, it will take you 2 read-throughs or perhaps 3 before you understand everything. But the making of the summary is the important bit here. Now, what I have here as an example is something taken from a student from last semester, where for one of the portfolio assessments, they had to do a summary of ideas in legal positivism. Now, the summary is not necessarily 100% correct, but it gives you an idea of what such a summary could look like in graphic format. And you can start off by using the headings in your study guide. That gives you an idea of everything that is covered. But don't just stick with that. You need to have a short summary next to every one of the philosophies or approaches, setting out exactly what that thing is about. Typically for legal positivism, you would have the 3 themes in legal positivism, and then you would have, the various debates, but set out in a very short format so that it is limited to 1 page, more or less, per philosophy. And you're going to keep this with you right through the whole process. Okay, so once you have your summaries, you keep that to the side. And you're now going to focus on the article. And this is how an article in a law journal is usually structured. And as I said, this is also how dissertations and theses are constructed. And although they will differ somewhat, this is the basic setup. It will start with an introduction. And in the introduction is actually really important because it will tell you what the problem statement is. In other words, why did this person write this article to begin with? What is the problem he or she is trying to address? Then there will be what I call a roadmap. In other words, the article will say, in section 1, I will deal with this, that, and the other thing. In section 2, I will deal with that. In section 3, with that. So it will tell you exactly what is going to happen as you read through the article. And this is important because you need to know which parts are important for your purposes and which are not. And then in the last place, it will already hint at the solution, a possible answer to the problem that was just raised. So that's your introduction, really important. The second section will usually be the content, and this can be subdivided into various subdivisions and headings and whatever. In law, there usually will be three things. There will be a historical perspective, a comparative perspective, and a philosophical perspective. Let me quickly tell you what I'm talking about here. The historical perspective is usually something along the lines of, okay, here was the legislation beforehand, then there was a court case, then the legislation was changed. That's history. That's the story of how we got to where we are now and why it created a problem. You will have that in practically every single article. There will be some version of, here's how we got here. Then there will be, for most cases, and this is not always the case, but for most cases, there will be a comparative aspect. In other words, they will say, okay, so now we have this problem which comes from this history. In other countries, this has also been a problem, and this is how they solved it. And that comparison might be relevant for the problem at hand, or it might not. And the author might say, well, they got it wrong as well. But there will be a comparative aspect to it. And then there will be a philosophical aspect to it. And I use philosophy here in a very broad sense. In other words, there will be something along the lines of, the principle behind the matter is this, or my approach to this problem is based on this philosophical point of departure. Although they won't always use the word philosophical, and that's of course why it gets difficult and why you can't always find someone's philosophy. You have to sometimes just gather it, deduce it from what you know about philosophy. Okay, and then in the last place, there will be a conclusion. And I don't know, this is now silly, but the conclusion will provide a link between the introduction and the content. It is a very bad article that doesn't, in the conclusion, say, okay, that was the problem statement. I thought this is the solution. Here is why I think that is the solution, something like that. But there will be a link between the problem that was stated and the conclusion that the author comes to. Keep this in mind as I give you an example from my own writing. This is just an example. I don't want to use Cockrell's article because, well, I'm not going to spoon feed you. This is an example from an article I wrote in 2017. And if you're very, very lucky, the article will start off with that little section in a box, which is a summary. It is an abstract or a summary. And this is what I expect from you in the first part of the question for assignment 2. It is a summary in very few sentences of the main ideas of an article. And you will have to write this kind of a summary also for your own dissertation. And note this is an article of quite a few pages. And it can be summarized in that small paragraph. And that's why you're also limited to the number of words you can use for question 1. Try to get the essence of the argument that the person is making within that paragraph. And that's all you need to do. Make sure you can summarize it properly in here. Unfortunately, Cockrell doesn't have a summary, but yeah, life must be a little bit more difficult sometimes. Okay, now, if you then look at the introduction to the article, you will see that this tells you the background and what happens, etc., etc. But look there in the second paragraph where it says it requires a multidisciplinary approach. In other words, you already know this article is not just about law. It's about various disciplines. It's about climate science. It's about nutrition science and how they link to law. So the author will quite often tell you what his or her approach is. Look for the words, my approach is, my take on this is, I think this. That's where you find this, the secret. And then if you look at the last paragraph, this is your roadmap. This is where it tells you we are going to have to look at the debates that have been going on, and lawyers will become involved in climate cases and in nutrition cases, and that means that we will have to change the way we teach students, because they do not necessarily have a grounding in these sciences. And then we'll come to a conclusion. So in that paragraph, there is a roadmap to tell you what's going to happen next. And that's important for you to know, because that's how you understand the rest of the stuff. Okay, now we get to the content part of the article, where we explain the climate wars and fat wars and how they played out. By the way, you will notice this article uses the Harvard method of referencing. You're not allowed to use Harvard for legal philosophy. You must use the prescribed method of referencing. This is just to show you what can be done. And this one already will have a bit of history. For example, it refers to Kant's philosophy. And Kant, of course, lived in the 18th century. So this is already an indication of the history that will be included in this whole story. And actually, a large part of this specific article tells the story of how the debate about climate change and the debate about the role of fat in our diets has developed and what played different roles in it. So already a bit of history and comparison. I'm not going to show you everything from the article, please. I'm not that vain. But look at here, once again, we have a summary. And quite often, authors will do that. They will not say it's a summary, but they will tell you, okay, so what we've come to so far is this. And that is a very important thing to use when writing your own summary, is to look out for where the author has summarized his or her ideas himself or herself. And then also, and this is why I say you need to already have a summary of your study material next to you when you're reading the article. Look at this title, subheading. It says Law, Politics and Science. Now, where have you heard the terms law and politics used together before? That's right. If you've gone through all of your study material, you will know that the idea that law is politics comes from critical legal studies. And so therefore, I've given it away here. I've told you what my approach is. It's a critical legal studies approach. So look at that and you look for the giveaway signs. But for that to work, you need to know the material. Okay, so let's then get to the third part of what you need for the assignment, and that is how to analyze a question. And this is the question specifically as from your tutorial letter 101. I've already spoken about question 1, which is the summary, which you must be able, look at this, it's 5 marks. 5 marks is less than half a page. You need to be able to summarize it in 300 words or less. That's usually what journals tell you, 300 words or less. Okay, but it's the second question that apparently most people have trouble with. So I've highlighted part of question 1. I've said here specifically that this question deals with the approach to judicial decision making. Therefore, question 2 can only refer to that part of your study material that has to do with how judges decide cases. So you now need to have the summary you have of that section in your study guide next to you while you're reading Cockrell's article, so that you can look for what he is arguing against and what he's arguing in favor of. And if you have the material next to you, you will be able to recognize the various things he says, to understand where he's going. one word of warning here. Cockrell discusses case law up to Yazoo. I'm not interested in case law for this question. I'm interested in his philosophical approach. And you can, in footnotes, say Cockrell here is basing his argument on this case or this case or that case. Provided, of course, you've read the cases, because if you haven't read them, you cannot refer to them. Okay, so the whole point then of question 2 is you must figure out which philosophy Cockrell is actually advocating. And it might be that what he's advocating for is not what you think he's advocating for, because he does talk about substantive reasoning and formal reasoning, and be very, very careful. Make sure you understand his argument, and then try and link that to one of the approaches in the study guide. And yes, there's a correct answer and a wrong answer for this one. He is advocating for a very specific approach to legal interpretation and to how judges decide cases. So there you have it. Make sure that you find the clues that we leave in the questions in analyzing the questions themselves. If you don't, you are going to go answering the wrong kind of questions. Okay, so finally, for your assignment, you now need to bring the three aspects together. You need to have the knowledge of the material, which you will then use to analyze the article to make sure you're answering the right question. And if you do these three things together, then you will have a good assignment. That's it. Thank you.